The first to plead his case seems right till the other party examines him. To me, that is very powerful, because sometimes when I hear like arguments from different anti-missionaries or former believers who have an emotional agenda going on, or maybe they just, they felt, honest in their rejection of Yeshua or whatever. I have no idea. But
Right.
when I hear those arguments for the first time, or when I hear certain things, sometimes it seems like their case is right until you start to really look at it and it starts breaking down logically, theologically, textually, historically, and archaeologically. So there has to be multiple points of contact when we're dealing with something like the New Testament, or even the Tanakh, by the way. And we have to use equal weights and measures, which is another thing I think that I have never really seen anybody do when they reject the New Testament, and I'm not even talking about accepting it as canon scripture. I'm talking about just on the face of it, accepted as a valid witness of history.
Exactly.
When somebody rejects it and they say, here's the reasons why, point, if they accept the Tanakh and they use these exact points against the New Testament, I don't know if they realize that every point that they can use against the New Testament, you can use against the Tanakh like 5 times over.
And it has been used. It has been used by different scholars the same weights. Maybe they're unaware that these points are being made by other scholars who object to the Bible in general.
So that's a very important point. But the reason why is there's a website called infidels.org. Okay, I'm not here to advertise for them in any way, shape, or form, but infidels.org is the largest atheist website, and it's a giant repository of atheist thought and criticism of the Bible, Tanakh, Bricha Hadashah, New Testament. They attack it all, and a lot of the arguments that the anti-missionaries, like Rabbi Tovia Singer or different rabbis, and I'm not talking about just rabbis in general, just like people in general that are anti-missionary.
Right.
Most people think that this is some kind of chiddush. They think this is some kind of like new argument, or this is some kind of something new that no one has ever heard before. When most of like 99% or 95% of all the arguments from anti-missionaries are really just rehashed, regurgitated atheist arguments that people have already known about for thousands of years. Like people have already this has already been dealt with, actually. So, and I don't think a lot of people know that. In one of these videos that somebody sent me this week, they said, and this is a valid criticism, by the way, that a lot of people in the Messianic world, in the Christian world, whenever you ask somebody a question, the answer is, well, God told me, or you can't challenge, whatever. It's like they didn't have answers for the challenges that they were presented. And these people that lost their faith in Yeshua as the Messiah, that disappointed, and that's understandable. It disappointed them. But looking at it, I do see that as a massive problem in the Messianic world, in the Christian world, and even in the Jewish world to a large degree, is that people are really not educated on how to answer objections, or they have kind of accepted it as myths, some of the myths of the New Testament. Such as, and I think this is one of the myths of the New Testament I actually heard, and we could talk a little bit about this, is that the New Testament was a Catholic creation and was canonized at the Council of Nicaea under Constantine in 325 CE. Looking at that, there's just so much wrong with that on its face. What would you say to somebody that says, hey, the New Testament is a creation of the Catholic Church? I mean, what is your response to that?
I have heard this a few times, and a lot of times I'm just I'm taken back. I mean, I'm not a scholar. I'm not a scholar, okay, but I consider myself a serious student of the Bible, and this is pretty flimsy stuff. It has no foundation at all. The New Testament in total, completely, predates the establishment of traditional Christianity as it is found in Roman Catholicism. It is the mother church. Roman Catholicism is the mother church of all Christian denominations, and the New Testament text, all of them, predate the institution of the church. We can see this through the scholarship on the text itself, the dating of the Gospels, the dating of the other books of the New Testament, which are even earlier than the Gospels. Many times, the books of Paul are even earlier, quoted to be like late 50s, early 60s. So, I mean, the church as an establishment is not even founded till like 250 to 300 years after Jesus and the apostles.
So that's a huge part. That's a huge point right there, because all the writers of the New Testament, they're all Jews, okay? Maybe with the exception of Luke, who might have been a convert, we're unsure. But the writers of the New Testament were all Jews, and you can tell by not only the archaeological aspects, but the points of contacts with Josephus and the historical angles of this. I mean, and it's funny when I hear people argue against the New Testament and saying stuff like crazy claims like Nazareth didn't exist. Like there was a guy wrote a book, his name was Rene Salm. He wrote a book, basically, his whole thesis was that Nazareth never existed, okay? The next year, they were doing an archaeological dig on Nazareth, and they found it, all right? So, like, this guy's entire thesis was blown apart. Boom. But it was a disaster, and even people like agnostic scholars like Bart Ehrman destroyed this idea that this didn't exist. But I still see anti-missionary websites sharing this, promoting this, this lie that has gone out for, I don't know, for a long time. And I think it's very important for people to think logically. All right, so absence of evidence does not equate to evidence of absence. All right, so this is just basic logic that apparently a lot of the skeptics and anti-missionaries, their brain fell out of their head because they bought a bill of goods, because absence of evidence does not equate to evidence of absence. And this, so the archaeology of Nazareth is something is developing, but when they didn't even dig in the place of the actual where the city was. It's a very small town, okay, very small town, and they weren't even digging in that. And there was a theory that this never existed because they didn't find, evidence of civilization when they weren't digging where there was civilization during that period. So, and then they have discovered it a year after that, this guy, Rene Salm's book, which is pure garbage, by the way, was published. So, I mean, that totally destroyed his idea. But the shocking thing is that lies continue to be promulgated. And it's just like Lashon Hara.
Of course.
That somebody starts a rumor, and this rumor just gets compounded. It kind of reminds me, a couple of years ago, there was an email going around, and this email basically said that NASA had discovered a missing day in history that corresponded to the day that of Joshua's conquest. And number one, no one ever thought to ask, okay, where is the evidence for this? What was the actual, how did they find this? Where would they even get this idea, or how would they calculate it? But this thing was shared via email, like millions of times by believers and all kinds of people alike, but it's completely false. All right. So in the same way, when people find something that agrees with their preconceived notion and they will share it without even critically thinking about it. And so here's one thing. How many times have you heard that the New Testament was canonized at the Council of Nicaea under Constantine?
Constantine. How many times?
That's and you know what's so shocking about? There's no evidence for that.
It's not only that. It's almost told as if, when I hear it, it's like, it seems like something that comes out of a Dan Brown movie or book.
Matter of fact, look at this. Check out what you just said. Look at this. It is actually a popular misconception that may trace its source back to a 9th century Greek manuscript called Synodicon Vetus, and it later popularized by the likes of Voltaire, and much later in Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. In other words, there's no record of any discussion of the biblical canon at the council. So this is exactly where, the modern idea comes from, but it even predates that in the times of Voltaire, who lived, like in early 1800s, late 1700s, or whatever. But looking at this, when a lie starts somewhere, and they don't even have evidence for it, that is not enough to stop it. So
I think what happens then a lot of times, and this is I'm not talking about people, but it's just a fact of life. The majority of people who call themselves Christians and the majority of people who just follow the Bible in general do not have a really solid education on the Bible. I mean, this is just a fact. And I think that a lot of times people with a heavy bias, a prejudice towards the New Testament or just the Bible in general, they prey on these things. So, I mean, it's pretty simple with the traditional education that someone may have of the Bible to be able to pick apart everything they thought that they believed.
Right.
Because it's very fairy tale like. So the moment you can give a few type of facts, I mean, everything starts to fall apart. And then this is how people usually lose their faith. It's as simple as that. I've seen it happen time and time again. And so these people, because they didn't have a very solid education on what they believed, now they feel that they've been lied to about everything and turn and start attacking the very things that they used to believe. Seen this happen plenty of times to Messianics and Christians who run into a rabbi who might have some type of he has some education, a very good education on the Hebrew Bible and stuff like that. And, a lot of people, I'm sorry to go somewhere else, but a lot of people misunderstand that a rabbi, he is a scholar when it comes to the Torah, with the Bible. This does not make a rabbi a scholar on history. This does not make a rabbi a scholar on the New Testament. And a lot of times people in the Messianic realm and just Christianity in general, they think that the rabbi is a scholar in all these things, and that is definitely not true.
It's a common misconception. It is a common misconception that every rabbi is an expert in every single field. Even in Judaism, like this is well known that this is not the case. Not every rabbi is an expert on every single thing. So they have specialties. One guy's a mashgiach; he's an expert in kosher law, and then this guy over here is an expert in marriage law, and then this guy over here is the guy that you need to talk to about, if you want to go to, if you want to learn about the, whatever halakhic issue there is. I mean, there are some rabbis that are just Gaonim. They're just super geniuses.
Yes.
But I mean, those are few and far between. Let's face it.
No. And, I mean, of course, a rabbi. There's some rabbis who are very exceptional and are very learned in various aspects, concepts, subjects of the Torah. Many aspects. Some of them can cover any aspect of Torah for sure. But what rabbi, traditional rabbi, do you know who is an expert on the New Testament? I mean, for the majority of times, and this is something that I've always seen, is that Orthodox rabbis or traditional rabbis, what are they usually doing? They're objecting to classical Christian stances, theological stances, which is off from the beginning. So we're fighting a losing battle from the very beginning. From the very beginning, a Christian is giving a false narrative about the New Testament, okay, for the most part. And the rabbis are objecting to this false understanding.
So that is a really critical part right there, because most rabbis, it is not their field. The New Testament's not their field. I mean, if it were their field, I mean, they would probably be believers, and they would read it like a believer.
With an objection like Jesus is not a historical character.
Okay, so let's take that here for a moment. And I recently heard a very prominent anti-missionary come out with this idea that Yeshua didn't exist. And like, no serious scholar believes that. All right. So anybody that promulgates this idea that Yeshua did not exist, all right, is completely outside the mainstream, and they're completely on the fringe of scholarship. Nobody believes that. So Bart Ehrman, who is an agnostic scholar, this guy's he's not pro Yeshua, he's not pro New Testament. He's an expert in the New Testament, although he's against the New Testament in many ways. He defends strongly the historicity of Yeshua, and especially when he's mentioned in Tacitus, Suetonius. We can take the Josephus thing and break that down. And then a reference in Mara Bar Serapion and Lucian of Samosata. I was sitting there listening to a former believer just recently saying that the New Testament was the only literature that was in existence in the first century, and there's no evidence of Yeshua. It's like, nobody believes this. These people there's two things. Either they don't know what the evidence says, or they know and they don't say. And this is a particular angle on all the anti-missionary arguments that are being promulgated. When I hear somebody argue, whether in Bezrat Hashem, Ray, we'll go through in these conversations. We'll go through and we'll focus on, like, okay, here's Psalm 2. We'll take Psalm 2 as is. We'll go through the objection. Should it say kiss the Son? Should it say worship impurity? Yada, yada. We'll go through all those. Psalm 22, the famous crucifixion psalm. Did Matthew paint Jesus into the Tanakh, as Rabbi Tovia Singer says? But as we go through these, hopefully we can show what Chazal says. All right, so Chazal, this is what really matters. It's not my interpretation. Who am I? In my interpretation, no one cares what I think. The real question is, what did the ancient sages think? And when it comes to this, how did they interpret particular passages? Is the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David, are these concepts in harmony with the New Testament or not? And when I hear arguments against the New Testament that conveniently leave out the arguments of Chazal, that leave out Talmudic quotes, that leave out the Midrash, the Zohar, conveniently leave out these arguments that, or these passages that rips the rug out from their position, it makes me think, why didn't they bring this up? So just looking at this, the same thing with the historicity of Yeshua. No serious scholar rejects the historicity of Yeshua. Nobody. All right. If they reject the historicity of Yeshua, they're on the fringe. Okay. And there's plenty of people on the fringe. And that's another thing that I think, that when people are following various teachers on the internet, okay, I think they need to be very careful if those teachers exhibit certain characteristics. For instance, if they're always stirring up strife, or if they're always promoting conspiracy theories, all right? If they're very demagoguery, if their messages are full of demagoguery, of pitting people against each other and all kinds of things, this is not the way of the Torah. This is not how it's supposed to go. So when I see certain things, and I see like former believers who a lot of people I know are following, like stir the pot, and they're attacking the New Testament with really whack arguments. That makes me take back and say, like, do they know what they're saying, number one, but do the people following them understand really what is being said?
No, that's huge, Ben. That's huge, and it's something that happens a lot. I think that we just have to be honest, okay? So, like, for example, if somebody believes Jesus is the Messiah, that's neither here or there to me personally. If you do, cool. I mean, there were plenty of people in Talmudic times that believed their rabbi was the Messiah, and there's no objection to that, no harm, no foul, and that has never stopped. I mean, there's people who believe Rabbi Nachman was the Messiah. There's people who believe Rabbi Schneerson, these rabbis of blessed memory who, even though they have passed, they still believe that these people will come back as the Messiah. I mean, no problem, right? But if someone were to believe that Jesus is the Messiah because of what has happened in history, right? The phenomenon that's happened in history, this is automatically foul. This is no good, and it is attacked like nothing else. So when the New Testament, for example, says somewhere, and remember, the New Testament is very, very, very ancient text. It is first century Judaism, something that a lot of people don't even understand. It's different, right? Jesus lived and worshipped and taught during a time when the Second Temple was still standing. Okay, a lot of times this is a very difficult field for a lot of scholars, a lot of rabbis. Traditional Judaism is a very difficult field. I see a lot of times rabbis or anti-missionaries, whether they're rabbis or not, attack the New Testament with the standard of Judaism today. So they'll say something like, what's nominal, what's normal halacha or outlook, a Jewish outlook of today, they will attack the New Testament, first century Judaism, with that same objection. I mean, that's anachronistic. You can't do that. You can't do that at all.
That is a very important part, very important point, is that the New Testament, okay, belongs to Second Temple Judaism and the literature thereof, okay? So it belongs to the Second Temple era, and when people attack it as if it's a Christian text, well, that argument itself is an anachronistic thing. As you mentioned earlier, Christianity and the Council of Nicaea, these are much later developments, okay? These are post-New Testament big time.
Yep.
There were lists, okay, where people, like as early as the middle of the 2nd century, at the very earliest, these are just the actual mentions, extant mentions of this. People were already reading the New Testament together in a congregational setting by the middle of the second century. So we're talking about 150 AD. People are reading it right alongside the prophets, okay, in a congregational setting. And there were various lists that people said, okay, this book is legit, this book is legit. Most of the New Testament was already agreed upon, like in the year, by the early 2nd century, okay? By the early 2nd century, hundreds a year, or 150 plus years before Constantine or whatever didn't even show up on the scene. So it was all written by Jews. It belongs to Second Temple era Jewish literature. Every legitimate scholar knows that. And not just believers, by the way. Every scholar, like when we're talking about David Flusser, okay, when we're talking about Pinchas Lapid, when we're talking about even Rabbi Elijah Tzvi Soloveitchik, and when we're talking about Geza Vermish, and then we just have like a whole bunch, E.P. Sanders, and all these different scholars, okay? One of the, one of the greatest scholars of our David Flusser. I mean, this guy is a genius and a half. And so when you look at it, and even this is Joseph Klausner, who wrote,
historian.
That guy was a genius. He was just a Jewish scholar, but clearly the New Testament belongs in the Second Temple era, and that as long as we continue to view the text as if it's a Christian Gentile text, whose reference points are from Greek literature, not from Jewish literature, we will continue to misinterpret the text, okay?
Yep.
So this is the common response when most and you brought this up earlier, but most anti-missionaries are not arguing with the New Testament, and they're not arguing with Yeshua. They are arguing against a Roman Christianity that is a much, much later development.
Against its lens and against its theology. Always, over and over and over and over again, I hear this stuff, and I tell people, I mean, you object to that Christian argument. I object to it too. I mean, I have been, and we've talked about this. We've talked about this plenty of times. We talk about it with Christians. We talk about it with Messianics. I mean, we do this stuff, and the scholars have already also done this. The New Testament, when you read it and you're honest, and if you know history, you know first century text, Jewish text, and you read some traditional ancient Jewish text, Talmud, Gemara, you read the Gemara, or you read the teachings therein, you can literally find the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of the apostles, right there in the Talmud, right there in the Gemara, right there in the Midrashim. You can find these things. Why? Because the New Testament teachings, Okay, I mean, for lack of a better word, for we call it the New Testament, the writings of the apostles, whatever you want to call it. These writings are their foundation, and the fountain from which they spring is Torah Judaism. I mean, there have been plenty of rabbis. What did the late great the Yavitz Rabbi Jacob Emden, he read it with open eyes, with an unbiased outlook. And what did he say? He castigated both sides. He castigated the Christian community of his day, and also a lot of his Jewish brethren. He was trying to educate them. What did he say? He said, Jesus and the apostles, they never taught against the Torah. Jesus himself, he promoted the Torah and strengthened the Torah, like he says, like no other rabbi has ever done. He said he strengthened it, and he brought down a double blessing. He strengthened the Torah of Israel, and he did much good to the Gentiles, as long as they do not go against their first fathers. Who are those? The Jewish people. Jesus was Jewish. The apostles were Jewish.
This is critical. What the Yavet says, what you just nailed it. He says the Nazarene brought a double blessing to the world, because he brought light to the Gentiles, and he also strengthened our Torah emphatically, like none of our other sages did. And he said all these guys kept the Shabbat. They kept of course they kept the Shabbat.
It's there. It's there. What does it say about Jesus? He gets up on Saturday to do what? To go to church? No, he went to synagogue. And he read the Torah like Jews all across the world read the Torah on Shabbat morning. They read from the Torah, they read from the prophets, all that there. I was reading an article by a scholar and a rabbi, Rabbi Skiffman, and he says that a lot of things that we learn for the first time about ancient Judaism. What is the text that shows us these things? Scholar, this rabbi says, the New Testament. The earliest.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So the very first mention of naming a baby boy, reading the Torah with the prophets, the Haftarah, reading with the naming of a baby boy on the 8th day of his Brit Milah. The first mention of this is in the New Testament.
Yeah, Jewish communities found not only in Israel, but outside of Israel, in the diaspora, are mentioned in the New Testament text. And people did not know that these communities existed until excavations by archaeology, and they found them exactly where the New Testament text says.
Okay, so with that, I want to throw up an objection. We just maybe throughout these times, when we come across objections throughout the week, we'll throw up the objection, and we'll see where it goes. But there's a claim. It's a historical flaw that Mark says that the Pharisees and Herodians worked together to destroy Yeshua. Historically, the Pharisees were opposed to the Herodians. At the end of Mark's gospel, the Sadducees are the ones who are responsible. So I read this week, and I'm kind of baffled that this argument would be made. I'm a little bit baffled as if the Pharisees were one monolithic group who walked in lockstep. I mean, nobody today, this is not even human, all right, that everybody would always agree with each other at all times. This is not even a legitimate objection, but this is an actual objection that came. I don't even really know what to say other than to say, okay, yes, historically, the Pharisees were opposed to the Herodians. In first century Israel, let's go through this just for a moment. First century Israel, there were various groups and competing factions in the first century.
Yes.
You had the Pharisees, the Sadducees, you had the Essenes, you had the Zealots, which we'll talk about the Zealots a little bit. You had the Zealots, you had Herodians, you had the Romans, you had the Sadducees, the Sadducees. All of these guys were different competing factions. But to say that Mark made a historical error here because the Pharisees and the Herodians didn't like each other, that's like saying that Republicans and Democrats have never worked together, or that there's not some Republicans that would work with Democrats and vice versa. It's just like seemingly very ignorant of history itself, especially when we understand the Talmudic view of how the Pharisees themselves within this group had different opinions and different arguments. There was the side of the Shammaites, the side of the Hillelites.
The school of Hillel and the school of Shammai.
Yeah, you had Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, and in the days of Yeshua, Beit Shammai was in power.
Yeah, they were the popular view. They were the majority view. Yeah.
They were the majority view, and they were also the ones who were mostly like letter of the law. They were like very strict. And
they were very strict, yeah.
And matter of fact, the Talmud says the day that the Shammaites got power was as grievous for Israel as the day that the golden calf was made.
The golden calf was created, yeah.
And so within the first of all, we also need to know that the Pharisees are the good guys, all right?
Yes.
Largely the Pharisees are the good guys in the first century, but there's no group that is immune from evil or wickedness or whatever. The Talmud itself.
That's true of any system.
Any system. The Talmud itself talks about the plague of the Pharisees, and it mentions 7 types of Pharisee. Only 5 of which are bad. And there's only like 2 that are good. The Pharisee from love and the Pharisee from fear. The one who does his service out of the love of God, the one who does it out of the fear of God. Yeah. Matter of fact, let's look at this from Sota 22b. Let's see what you think about this. It says, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, that which is hidden, and that which is revealed. But in heaven everything is known, and the great court will exact payment from those who wear the cloak of the righteous, but are in fact unworthy. The Gemara relates, King Yani said to his wife before he died, do not be afraid of the Pharisees, and neither should you fear those who are not Pharisees, i.e. the Sadducees. Rather beware the hypocrites who appear like Pharisees, as their actions are, they act like the act of the wicked Zimri, but they want the reward. They request the reward like the righteous Pinchas, who was a Kanai, who was a zealot. So here's the Talmud. By the way, the Talmud is written by the Pharisees, right? It's written by the descendants of the Pharisees who are calling out and saying there's wicked people among us, called the plague of the Pharisees. This argument that the book of Mark made a historical error by singling out some Pharisees who aligned with the Herodians to knock out a common enemy is just whack.
It fails on so many levels. I mean, they forget to, and here's where history is very good to know. They fail to realize how strong Rome was in that time, and how overpowering they were. The Sadducees were not even ruling according to their offices regarded as Torah mandates. They were placed there by Rome, highest bidder, and they were given the power. Many people say stuff like, I've heard these objections. They'd be like, Jesus was he was accused by the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin is placed there by God, and so he was a sinner. So was Stephen and all this stuff. They failed to realize that the Sanhedrin that was established at that time was a Sanhedrin led by the Sadducees. And the rabbis today themselves will tell you that a court that is led by the Sadducees is not valid. Was not valid. Is not a valid court. And we also know that I've heard Orthodox rabbis say that the court, as it is portrayed in the New Testament text, was a invalid court case. Lies were false witnesses were brought up. It was something that would not hold up according to Torah standards.
Yeah, it's a violation of not only the written Torah, but also the oral Torah. And we know from Josephus that under the predecessor to Pontius Pilate, there was a guy named Valerius Gratus, and he was basically in league with Annas, or obviously not in league. He was basically forcing. He deposed Annas from being the high priest, and he placed in Ishmael the son of Fabi, and then he kept interchanging, kick him off and put him on. Whenever somebody pleased him, he'd kick him off. And apparently, it appears that Annas, called Hanin, in the background was I don't know whether he was bribing or puppeteering, where his own sons and his sons-in-law were being head of the priesthood, which exerted at that time tremendous political and religious influence in first century Israel. And matter of fact, we have it right here in Pesachim 57a in the Talmud. It says, Abba Shaul ben Batnit said in the name of Abba Yosef ben Chanim, woe is me because of the house of Boethist. Woe is me because of their staves. Woe is me because of the house of Chanin. Woe is me because of their whisperings. Woe is me because of the house of Katros. Woe is me because of their pens. Woe is me because of the house of Ishmael, the son of Fabi. Woe is me because of their fists. For they are high priests, and their sons are the temple treasurers, and their sons-in-law are trustees, and their servants beat the people with staves. Wow. So here we have a Talmudic evidence that agrees with the New Testament, by the way.
Yep.
That there were conspiracies and things going on in the background that were not kosher whatsoever. Even the Talmud, it's actually in the Mishnah, agrees that the shulchanim, the temple table, the money changers, were ripping people off, charging a golden denarius for 2 doves, which was for the poor, and they were enriching themselves. All right, so all of this is the context of the first century, that you have not a monolithic group of the Pharisees. You had good Pharisees who came and warned Yeshua, don't go to Jerusalem because Herod wants to kill you.
Invited him over to dinner.
Invited him over to dinner. Yeshua himself was a Pharisee, as is defined very well by Rabbi Harvey Falk in his book. But when we look at this, we start seeing through the lies of the oversimplifications of skeptics, or the oversimplifications of anti-missionaries that want to see this as a very one-dimensional issue. People are not one-dimensional. It's just, it is what it is, which brings us to our next point. I think we could bring this up, is we heard this where it says, according to Mark, Yeshua was condemned by the Sadducees. If so, why did the Sanhedrin not proceed to carry out the sentence according to Jewish law, which would have been stoning? In John, it does say, take him out and judge him according to your Torah. Pilate told them, and the Jews and the Judeans, actually should say, says, we do not have the authorization to put a man to death. This is the skeptic's claim. It says, considering that John is not written till 95 to 100 CE, it is the late witness to the historical events of Yeshua. Furthermore, the Jews, if the Jews did not have authority to perform capital punishment, how did the Sanhedrin execute Stephen by stoning him? What about the death of Yeshua's brother, who was executed by the Sanhedrin? This question is honestly not good. This is not a good, half the time to get the right answer, you got to ask the right question. Right. And this is not even the right, phrased right. So first of all, why did the Sanhedrin not proceed to carry out the sentence according to stoning? The answer in the Gospels is that the Jewish people did not have the authority to execute criminals by the Sanhedrin decree in that time. And so the skeptic dismisses that and says this is not even a reliable witness because it was written in 95 to 100 CE. Let me answer that, and then I'll let you respond, Ray. See what you think. Respond to what I'm saying. First of all, in this same argument from the skeptic, they're citing the Mishnah, which was codified in 200 CE, while dismissing John's Gospel, which was written in 95. All right. So again, what we were talking about is equal weights and measures. I mean, if you want to dismiss John's Gospel, you'd also have to dismiss the Mishnah's testimony as well. But it's just not the Mishnah. It's the Talmud. The Talmud, and it's just not the book of the Gospel of John. The Talmud itself tells us in Sanhedrin 41a, and it has been taught, 40 years before the destruction of the temple, the Sanhedrin were exiled and they did not try capital charges. In Jerusalem Talmud, okay, so not just the Bavli, we're talking about the Yerushalmi too. It was taught 40 years before the destruction of the temple, the right to judge capital cases was withdrawn. So, so it's just not the book of John. We have the Jerusalem Talmud and the Talmud Bavli also agreeing with the New Testament against the argument of the skeptic here. But more than that, when we're talking about high-profile cases like Yeshua that had Rome's attention, that had everybody's attention, it's one thing. But when you're doing things outside of the norm, underhanded, according to the Talmud, the official stamp, the official adjudication of capital cases by the Sanhedrin was withdrawn at that time. That's why they could not execute. All right, that's why it was handed over to the Romans.
Right.
That is right there in Sanhedrin in both Jerusalem and Talmud Bavlis. All right. So when you look at this further, you see in Josephus, if you read antiquities about the time of Yeshua, you'll see that murders were commonplace. You'll see that people were getting murdered left and right, getting knocked off and getting knocked out by political intrigue. We just now read about Ishmael, the son of Fabi, and all the Sadducean priests who were having secret conclaves and secret conspiracies. Conspiracies have been around a long time, and there wasn't like an official statement from the Sanhedrin, but there were people getting killed left and right. And this is evidenced in Josephus. It's evidenced in the New Testament, and it's a historic fact. So when you see these arguments that are against just history, it's just really weird to see it, number one. But number two, in Jerusalem Talmud, in the Talmud Bavli, in Yoma 23, it says that there were two priests racing each other towards the altar, towards the Mizbeach in the temple. One of the priests grabbed the sacrificial knife and he jammed it into the heart of his brother the priest in the temple. Okay, this is in the Talmud. As this priest is lying convulsing in his own blood, the father of the dying priest runs up and he tells the other priest, remove the sacrificial knife quickly before he dies so the sacrificial knife does not contract tumah, so that it does not get ritual impurity. And the Talmud is heartbroken about this, by the way. And the Talmud says, this goes to tell you that in this era, people cared more about ritual purity than they did shedding of blood. All right? That's the context we're dealing with here. And so the fact that somebody breaks the law of Romans is not something that is to be surprising at all. We read about the execution of Yaakov HaTzadik by Joseph the Righteous in Josephus, okay? But we also know that the right to...
In Josephus, yeah.
It's in Josephus, but the right to try capital cases and to execute as an official action was taken away. This is not really difficult. This is not hard. So I'm just looking at this like,
that
why
wasn't
is
a
this
Sanhedrin. That wasn't a case that there wasn't. Yeah, that wasn't even a case with Yaakov. That was even something that he was tried before Sanhedrin. They threw him off the pinnacle of the temple. I mean, where is that as a capital way of punishment? I mean, that was murder.
He was murdered. That's the way it is. He was murdered, and murder was commonplace. That's something that Josephus says. That's something that the New Testament says. That was the spiritual condition of Israel in the first century that merited the Qurban, that merited the destruction of the temple.
The Talmud says, the Talmud says that the second temple was destroyed because Sinat Hinam, right? But there are other places in the Gemara that explain other reasons why the second temple was destroyed. One of them being the religious leaders of that time were corrupt.
Yes, and we read it too about.
But there were many of them.
That's right. And so when I'm really looking at this just in historic context, when I see various arguments being made, The first to plead his case seems right until another comes and examines him. Looking at the historical record, Mark did not make an error. The person who posted this post made an error. And it's really, it's kind of, I don't know what else to say. We just need to be people of truth. Just call a spade, and don't try to score points or try to find, read something in the New Testament hypercritically to try to score a point. Look, just read it and research it and really look at the historic context behind it, because it is completely a product of the Second Temple era Jewish world. Every scholar knows that. It's not a Christian text. Christianity wasn't around for hundreds of years until after that. It's a Jewish text. And until we start looking at the New Testament as a Jewish text and just calling a spade and just looking at it objectively through the eyes of facts and not agendas, then we'll see what it's actually saying. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it. It doesn't mean that somehow you're forced to believe in it. But you will have to say, look, you have to admit from a critical scholarship point of view, this is a Second Temple era text that is born from the soil of ancient Israel, that belongs to the Jewish people. This is a Jewish book. This has nothing to do with Christianity, and it's not an error. It's actually quite on the target. And I think when we do that, a lot of these arguments will fall by the wayside, and the truth will be seen as it is.
Oh, great words. That's a great way to end this. But Ben, I couldn't agree with you more, man. I mean, it's something that people just need to be honest, and we all need to try to learn together. I think that we're pretty serious in the sense of being students of the Bible, and we just hope that others can do the same. We don't want no one to just take my word for it or take your word for it, but these are things that can be verified. I mean, we've shown plenty of sources today, and it's just sad to see some of these objections that could really flimsy objections at that can really tear someone's faith down and cause a lot of trouble. People in these high positions of being a rabbi or a teacher or a pastor, that's a very high calling, and we should be here to try to build someone up, not to spread half truths or anything like that.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, Ray, thanks for the discussion. Bezrat Hashem, this will be the first of many. Maybe we'll start looking at some messianic prophecies through the lens of Chazal and see if it agrees with the New Testament or not, and really just start looking. We'll just present the information, the sources, and let the people decide. So, Laila Tov to you, and it's been great hanging out with you, and may Hashem bless you and your family, and everybody who's watching tonight too. I think this is very important. Like Ray said, don't take our word for it. Research it. Check it out. Look at the Talmud. Look at real scholars like David Flusser, or look at real scholars like the Jewish scholars and even some really intelligent Christian scholars that looked at the New Testament from a historical point of view, and just really saw that it was completely rooted in Second Temple Jewish world. Christianity is an afterthought. It's something that happens much later. And when we bring that into the discussion, we're actually muddying the waters and actually mixing things up, because that is completely anachronistic. So with that, may everybody be blessed, and y'all have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Amen.
Shalom.
Blessings.